Imagine flying into a wall of fire in a plane made of nothing but canvas and wood. You have no parachute, no radio, and no radar. Your engine is so loud that the enemy can hear you coming from miles away. So you do the unthinkable. You climb to 3,000 feet, cut your engine, and glide in total, ghostly silence over the German lines. The only sound they hear is the hiss of wind against your wings, a sound they said reminded them of a witch's broomstick. This isn't a myth. This was the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, and this is how they changed the face of war forever. Chapter 1. The Sky is Not a Man's World. The year was 1942, and the world was screaming. In Washington, D.C., Captain James Sterling of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, stared at a grainy reconnaissance photograph. It showed a German supply depot in Ukraine turned into a blackened crater. The intelligence report on his desk was dismissed by his superiors as Soviet propaganda. It claimed the raid was carried out by women. Impossible, his colonel had barked. The Soviets are desperate, but they aren't sending girls in crop dusters to stop the Wehrmacht. But Sterling knew the Germans were terrified. They were calling these pilots Nachthexen, night witches. He was ordered to travel to the Eastern Front, ostensibly as a liaison, but truly as a ghost hunter. He needed to know if these women were real, and if so, how they were surviving the greatest slaughter in human history. The Engels Airfield. 3,000 miles away, Marina Roskova stood before a line of young women whose faces still held the softness of youth, though their eyes had already hardened into flint. Marina was the Soviet Amelia Earhart, a legend who had convinced Stalin himself that women should fly combat missions. "They will tell you that the sky belongs to men," Marina shouted over the freezing wind of the Volga River. "They will tell you that your hands are meant for needles and thread, not the control stick of a Polikarpov PO2. They are wrong. Tonight, we do not just fly, we haunt." Among the recruits was Nadja, a 19-year-old physics student from Moscow. She looked at her war machine, the PO2. It was a biplane designed in 1928 for training and dusting crops. It was slow. It was fragile. If a single tracer bullet hit the fabric skin, the whole craft would become a funeral pyre in seconds. "Nadja," whispered her navigator, Sophia, "do you think the Americans are really coming to watch us?" "Let them watch," Nadja replied, tightening the straps of her oversized flight suit. "Maybe they'll learn how to fight." The first sortie. The mission was simple: disrupt the 13th Panzer Division. The PO2s could only carry 2 bombs at a time, one under each wing. To make an impact, they had to fly 8, 10, sometimes 15 sorties in a single night. As Nadja taxied down the dirt runway, the lack of technology was staggering. There were no lights. To help them land, soldiers would stand at the end of the strip and flash a torch for a split second. Once in the air, the cold was a physical blow. The cockpits were open. At sub-zero temperatures, touching the metal frame with a bare hand meant losing skin. "Target in sight," Sophia's voice came through a rubber tube, their only intercom. Below them, the German camp was a cluster of lights and arrogance. They didn't expect anything from the air. The heavy Junkers and Messerschmitts were too fast to hit such small targets. "Cutting engines," Nadja commanded. The engine's roar died. The sudden silence was deafening. The plane began its long, elegant glide. They were now just a shadow against the stars. The only sound was the whistling of the wind through the wire struts. Swoosh, swoosh. Nadja released the bombs. The explosion bloomed like a red carnation in the snow. Suddenly, the world below woke up. Searchlights snapped on, frantic fingers of white light stabbing at the dark. Anti-aircraft fire, flak, filled the sky with jagged shards of hot iron. "Bank left!" Sophia screamed. Nadia pulled the stick. The wooden frame groaned. A PO-2 was so slow that it had a lower stall speed than the minimum speed of a German fighter jet. If a Messerschmitt tried to shoot them down, it would literally fly right past them because it couldn't go slow enough to stay behind them. It was a dance between a hummingbird and a hawk. Chapter 2. The Smell of Snow and Gunpowder. January 1943. The Russian winter had reached its most merciless form. When Captain Stephen Hardley, an American OSS officer, arrived at the front lines in the Caucasus, the temperature had plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. His breath froze in midair, turning into tiny shards of ice. But the cold was not what shocked him most. What truly unsettled him was how the so-called night witches lived. There were no barracks, no warmth, no comfort. They slept underground in crude earthen dugouts the locals called zemlyankas, lying on straw as the frozen earth pressed in from all sides. "Do you really want to fly with them, Captain?" Soviet General Chuikov asked with a crooked smile. "They are not just pilots, they are avenging spirits." Hardly's eyes fell on Nadia. She was barely 20, yet the corners of her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age. She stood beside her Polikarpov PO-2, scraping ice off its fragile wooden fuselage with bare, reddened hands. "Captain Stephen," Nadia said in broken English, "your country has sent us many supplies, but courage we had to build ourselves. There is no heater in this aircraft." She paused, meeting his gaze. "Are you ready when death arrives in silence?" That night, Hardly witnessed something no American training manual had ever prepared him for. He was allowed to sit in the rear cockpit of one of their planes, strictly as an observer, but what he experienced felt closer to stepping into another world. The engine roared to life, tearing through the stillness of the night. The fragile biplane trembled as it clawed its way into the freezing sky. Then, as they neared a German anti-aircraft battery, Nadia did something unthinkable. She switched off the engine. Hardly's heart nearly stopped. "What are you doing? We'll crash!" he shouted over the wind. Nadia said nothing. The plane became a ghost, gliding silently through the darkness like a dead bird carried by invisible currents. This was their secret. With the engine off, German radar and sound detectors could not track them. They drifted toward their target, a massive German fuel depot. Nadia leaned forward and whispered, "Now." The bombs dropped. Seconds later, the sky erupted. Flames roared upward, painting the night in violent shades of red and orange. The explosion turned darkness into daylight. At that exact moment, Nadia restarted the engine. A faint hissing sound cut through the air, the eerie whisper that had terrified German soldiers for months. "The night witches! They've come!" they would scream from below. German fear and the Iron Cross. The Germans grew so desperate that Adolf Hitler himself declared a reward. Any soldier who could shoot down a Night Witch aircraft would be awarded the Iron Cross. But it was far from easy. These planes, made mostly of wood and canvas, flew so low and slow that German Messerschmitt fighters struggled to engage them. Dived too low, and the pilots risked crashing into the ground. Hardly later wrote in his diary, "A new turn, suspicion and love." As the nights passed, something changed. A Soviet intelligence officer began to suspect that Nadia and Captain Hardly were exchanging sensitive information. In the Soviet Union, any closeness with a foreigner could easily be labeled as treason. Surveillance around Nadia intensified. Then came the mission, a dangerous one. They were ordered to destroy a heavily fortified German searchlight zone, a mission that most quietly referred to as suicide. Nadia understood immediately. This wasn't just a mission, it was a test, or a trap. Hardly tried to stop her, but Nadia simply adjusted her helmet, her expression calm, almost serene. "Captain," she said softly, "in the sky we are all equal. There is no politics there." Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Machine. The air over the front line wasn't just cold, it was a physical weight. Captain Stephen Hadley sat in the cramped cockpit of Nadia's PO-2, realizing that everything he had learned at West Point was useless here. In the U.S. Army Air Forces, they talked about strategic bombing and altitude advantages. Here, survival was measured in inches. "Keep your head down, Captain." Nadia's voice crackled through the rubber speaking tube. "The searchlights are hungry tonight." Below them lay the Blue Line, a formidable German defensive position in the Taman Peninsula. It was a forest of anti-aircraft guns and the dreaded 88mm flak cannons. As they crossed the no-man's land, the sky erupted. To Hadley, it looked like a disco from hell. White beams of light swept the clouds, looking for the tiny silhouette of their plywood plane. "Why don't they hit us?" Hadley shouted, his knuckles white as he gripped the frame. "Because we are too slow," Nadia laughed, a sound that seemed insane amidst the tracers. "Their targeting computers are calibrated for planes going 300 miles per hour. We are going 70. They are literally aiming where we should be, but we are not there." The physics of survival. This was the great irony of the 588th Regiment. Their greatest weakness, the archaic, slow-moving biplane, was their greatest shield. The German Messerschmitt fighters found it almost impossible to shoot them down. To stay behind a PO-2, a German ace had to throttle back so much that his own plane would stall and fall out of the sky. But tonight, the Germans had a new toy, the pale blue light. Suddenly, a beam of light, different from the rest, narrower and more intense, locked onto their wings. "Searchlight trap," Nadia hissed. "When one light finds you, the others follow." Within seconds, 4 more beams converged on them. Nadia and Hadley were blinded. The cockpit turned as bright as a surgery room. Crack, crack, crack. The flak was getting closer. Shrapnel tore through the fabric of the lower wing. Hadley felt a sting on his cheek, a splinter of wood from his own aircraft. "Nadia, dive!" Hadley yelled. "No," she replied calmly. "If I dive, they track the motion. We go up." She pulled the stick back. The little 110-horsepower engine groaned. The plane climbed at an angle that felt vertical. Just as the engine began to sputter, she kicked the rudder hard. The plane performed a side slip, falling sideways like a leaf. The searchlights shot past them, searching the empty sky where they had been a second ago. In that moment of darkness, Nadia cut the engine. The silent death. The silence returned. It was the signature move of the night witches. Gliding through the dark, they became invisible. They were so low now that Hadley could smell the diesel from the German tanks. He could see the glowing embers of cigarettes held by terrified German sentries. Click. Nadia pulled the manual release lever. 2 100-kilogram bombs slipped from the wings. The explosion didn't just vibrate the air, it lifted the light biplane upward. A secondary explosion followed. They had hit an ammo dump. The shock wave sent a plume of fire 200 feet into the air, momentarily silhouetting their plane for every German gunner to see. "Engine! Start the engine!" Hadley urged. Nadia flipped the switches. The propeller turned, once, twice, and caught. The engine roared to life, just as a hail of machine gun fire stitched a line across their tail. Chapter 5. The Blue Light of Death. The arrival of the Soviet political commissar, a man named Colonel Volkov, shifted the atmosphere at the airfield from one of weary camaraderie to sharp paranoia. Volkov didn't care about the number of German tanks destroyed. He cared about the purity of the regiment. He viewed Captain Hadley not as an ally, but a capitalist virus. A man in a woman's regiment is a distraction, Volkov spat during a late-night briefing. An American man is a threat. But the threat from within was soon eclipsed by a threat from above. The Luftwaffe, humiliated by the night witches, had finally devised a counter-strategy. They deployed the Nachtjagd, specially equipped Messerschmitt Bf-110s, outfitted with primitive airborne radar and schräge music, upward-firing cannons that allowed them to shoot from below without being seen. The Inferno at 2,000 feet. The next night, the 588th faced their darkest hour. Nadia and Hadley were in the third wave of the attack. As they approached the target, a railway bridge vital for German reinforcements, the sky suddenly turned a sickly electric blue. "Nadia, look! Flashes in the clouds!" Hadley shouted. It wasn't flak. It was a German night fighter hunting by radar. A burst of cannon fire erupted from the darkness below. The plane ahead of them, piloted by Nadia's friend Galita, vanished in an instant. The wooden frame and fabric skin of the Po-2 didn't just break, they vaporized. In the dry, freezing air, the plane became a soaring torch. Hadley watched, horrified, as the burning wreckage spiraled down. No parachutes emerged. "They are hunting us like birds," Nadia cried, banking the plane so hard the struts screamed. "Drop the load. We need the speed," Hadley urged. "Not yet. The bridge is still standing." The impossible shot. Nadia dove. She didn't cut the engine this time. She pushed it to its absolute limit. The wind tore at Hadley's goggles, and the vibrations felt like they would shake his teeth loose. The German fighter was circling back. Its radar had a lock. "Hadley!" Nadia yelled over the roar. "The flare! Fire the signal flare to the clouds to our right!" Hadley understood instantly. The German radar was primitive. It could be confused by heat and light signatures close to the ground. He grabbed the flare gun and fired a blinding magnesium star into the mist. For 3 seconds, the German pilot was blinded by the reflection. In those 3 seconds, Nadia leveled the plane, aimed the nose at the center of the bridge, and released both bombs. A massive, bone-shaking thud echoed through the valley. The bridge groaned, twisted, and collapsed into the icy river below. The price of victory. As they limped back to base, the engine coughing oil, the victory felt hollow. That night, the regiment lost 4 planes, 8 women. In the debriefing hut, the mood was funeral. Nadia sat on a wooden crate, her hands stained with oil and blood, staring at nothing. Volkov stood in the corner, his eyes fixed on Hadley. "You saved her tonight, American, but you also made her a target. The Gestapo found your signal flare. They know we have guests. If you stay, you bring certain death to this regiment." Hadley looked at Nadia. She looked back at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "He stays," Nadia said, her voice like cold iron. "He flies. He fights. He is one of us now." Chapter 6. The Long Shadow of the OSS. By mid-1943, the tide of the war was turning, but the shadow of the Cold War was already being cast. Hadley received a coded message through a secret drop point in a nearby village. "Command, OSS HQ. Subject: Operation Red Silk. Order: secure technical specs of Soviet night navigation methods. Extract immediately. The alliance is temporary. Hadley stared at the paper. His government wanted him to spy on the very people who were keeping him alive. They wanted the secret of the night witches. He looked around the airfield. He saw women sewing silk from old parachutes to patch their wings. He saw them sharing a single loaf of black bread between 5 people. The secret isn't in the planes, you fools. The secret is the women, Hadley whispered to the empty air. The final betrayal. Hadley decided to burn the orders, but he wasn't the only one with secrets. Volkov had intercepted the message. The next morning, the airfield was surrounded by NKVD, Soviet secret police agents. Captain Stephen Hadley, Volkov announced, holding a pistol. You are under arrest for espionage against the Soviet state, and Nadia, you are under arrest for conspiracy. The regiment stood frozen. The women who had faced Hitler's panzers now faced their own government's muzzles. Wait! Raskova stepped forward, her medals clinking. This man is a hero of the Soviet Union. He flew the missions. He dropped the bombs. He is a spy, Volkov countered. In the chaos that followed, a siren began to wail. It wasn't the police. It was the air raid siren. A squadron of German UU-87s had found the hidden base. The ground exploded. Dirt, wood, and metal flew into the air. To the planes! Raskova screamed. In the fire and smoke, the lines between friend, enemy, and spy vanished. There was only the sky, the fire, and the desperate need to survive one more night.